When I found out where my husband had been, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there at the kitchen table staring at the small crumpled receipt lying beside my coffee cup. It was from a place called QQ Massage, a name I had never heard before. At first, I thought maybe it was something innocent, a simple massage place he'd visited after work to ease the back pain he often complained about. But as I looked closer, the time printed on it, 8:42 p.m., told a different story. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere but home at that hour. He had told me he was working late on a project. Something cold ran through my chest. I remember how my hand trembled when I turned the receipt over and saw the total, $260 cash. We don't use cash often. Everything in our home runs on cards, on statements, on a system that I handle. So why cash? Why there? Why hide it? I don't know how long I sat there, but the sound of my son's footsteps coming down the hallway broke my stillness. Mom, you okay? He was 12. Too young to carry the weight of adult secrets, but old enough to sense something was wrong. I looked up and forced a smile. Yeah, sweetheart. I'm fine. Go finish your homework, he nodded, hesitated for a moment, and then disappeared into his room. And that's when I felt it. The first tear slipping down my cheek, quiet and hot. That night, I waited for my husband to come home. The city lights were reflecting on the living room window, painting moving patterns on the walls. I sat on the couch with the receipt folded in my hand so tightly that the ink began to smudge. When the door opened, he smiled. That same easy smile that used to calm me after long days. But now it felt wrong. Fake, like it belonged to a stranger wearing my husband's face. You're still up? He asked, putting down his briefcase. I found something, I said softly. He froze. His eyes went to my hand, to the folded paper between my fingers. What's that? You tell me. For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick as smoke. Then he sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said something I never expected. It's not what you think. That sentence, those 5 useless words, broke something inside me. Because I already knew. I didn't know all the details, not yet, but I knew enough. My instincts had been whispering to me for months. The late nights, the extra showers, the distant eyes even when we were together. I had ignored them because I wanted to believe in the man I married. The man who once wrote me love letters from a cheap cafe in college. The man who held my hand through the birth of our 2 children. I wanted to believe he couldn't do something so ugly. But the truth sat right there in my palm. He didn't deny it. Not really. He tried to explain, to make it sound less cruel, less personal. He said it happened twice. He said it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, something meaningless. I remember his exact words. It didn't mean anything. I don't know what I was thinking. And I remember mine. You were thinking enough to take cash, to buy condoms, to plan it. The look on his face, shame, guilt, maybe fear, didn't comfort me. It only made me sick, because behind him, down the hallway, my daughter's door was slightly open. She was 15, and I knew she had heard everything. The rest of that night passed in fragments. Him trying to explain, me trying not to break. The city outside felt louder than ever. Cars honking, voices echoing, life moving on as mine fell apart. At one point, he said, "I'll sleep on the couch." I just nodded. I didn't care where he slept. I couldn't even look at him. Later, when the house was quiet, I walked into my daughter's room. She was pretending to be asleep, her phone screen still glowing faintly. I sat on the edge of her bed and whispered, "I'm sorry you heard that." She turned her face toward me, her eyes wet. "It's okay, Mom," she said. "Are you gonna be okay?" Her voice cracked on that last word. Okay. And I felt something inside me shatter completely. Because no, I wasn't okay. But I had to be. For them. I stroked her hair until she fell asleep, and then went back to my room, where the smell of his cologne still lingered in the sheets. It made me nauseous. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of our 17 years together. Our first date, our first apartment, the laughter, the fights, the promises. And I kept asking myself one question. Why wasn't I enough? Morning came too soon. The city woke up. The sound of trains, the distant hum of traffic, people rushing to jobs, to lives. I moved through the kitchen like a ghost, packing lunches, pouring coffee, pretending everything was normal. When he walked in, freshly showered and dressed for work, I didn't look up. "Can we talk later?" he asked quietly. "I have nothing to say right now." He nodded, picked up his briefcase, and left. The sound of the door closing echoed through the apartment, long and hollow. That was the beginning. The day I realized that a 17-year marriage could break in silence. No screaming, no throwing things, no drama, just quiet heartbreak and the dull ache of disbelief. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the anger and disgust, there was another feeling I couldn't yet name. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close. It was the beginning of something else. The faint awareness that maybe, someday, I would have to decide what came next. But at that moment, I just wanted to breathe, to survive the next minute, the next hour, the next day. Because when your world falls apart, surviving becomes the first act of courage. Before everything fell apart, my life looked perfect from the outside. We had a cozy apartment on the north side of Chicago, a place filled with sunlight in the mornings and the sound of laughter most evenings. Our building was old but beautiful, with creaky wooden floors that carried every footstep and big windows that framed the skyline like art. On weekends, I'd open the curtains, make pancakes, and let the smell fill the house while the kids sat at the kitchen counter, one doing homework, the other talking about some new video game. Those mornings used to make me feel complete, safe, like I had built a little world of my own that no one could break. My husband, I'll call him David here, would come in from his morning jog, sweaty but smiling, kiss me on the cheek, and say, "Smells amazing, babe." And I'd smile back, the way wives do when life feels stable and kind. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I worked in finance, managing corporate accounts for a Chicago firm. It was a demanding job, but I loved it. It made me feel capable, independent. David, on the other hand, worked in IT support for a small company downtown. He was the steady one, calm, patient, the kind of man who fixed things quietly without ever making a fuss. We met in college, both of us too young to know what we really wanted, but sure we'd found it in each other. He was gentle and funny, and I was drawn to that softness. Back then, the world felt like it belonged to us. After graduation, we married in a small church just outside the city. It rained that day, but I didn't care. I remember laughing as we ran to the car, holding my dress up from the wet pavement, thinking that if love could feel this easy, we could handle anything. For years, that belief carried me. We had our first child, Emily, 2 years after marriage. I still remember holding her in the hospital, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. David cried, not loud sobs, but quiet tears that fell without sound. He kept whispering, "She's perfect." 2 years later came Ryan, our little boy with big brown eyes and an endless curiosity for everything. Those early years were chaos, but the good kind. Sleepless nights, messy diapers, family photos with someone always blinking. We were learning how to be parents, how to grow together without losing ourselves. And for a long time we did. Our days followed a rhythm. David would drop the kids at school before heading downtown, and I'd handle the evenings. He loved cooking, his way of unwinding. So dinners were his time. I can still picture him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, humming to old songs while stirring something on the stove. Sometimes, when I came home late after meetings, I'd find the table already set, The kids laughing about something he said. He'd look at me with that familiar, tired but content smile, and I'd feel grateful. Lucky, even. We had inside jokes, shared looks across crowded rooms, quiet nights watching Netflix with our feet tangled on the couch. It wasn't passion all the time, but it was comfort. The kind that makes you feel you belong somewhere. So when people talk about red flags, I think about how easy it is to miss them when life feels ordinary, when you're too busy holding everything together to notice what's slipping away. The changes started small, almost invisible. It began with silence, not the angry kind, just quieter evenings. He'd spend more time on his phone, scrolling through things I didn't ask about. When I asked how his day was, his answers got shorter. And sometimes, when I'd reach out to hold his hand while watching TV, he'd pull away, gently, like he didn't mean it. I told myself he was stressed. His job wasn't going well, and I knew he felt overshadowed by mine. He never said it outright, but I could see it in the small ways. The hesitation when I talked about my promotion, the way he laughed it off when people called me the ambitious one. I tried to lift him up, encouraged him to take new courses, apply for better positions, but he always said, maybe later. Sometimes, I think that's when the distance began. Not from lack of love, but from quiet resentment neither of us named. We still did family things, trips to the lake, dinners with friends, birthday parties. But even in those moments, there was a shadow behind his eyes. He was there, but not fully there. One evening after the kids were asleep, I asked him, "Are you happy?" He looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, you seem far away lately." He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I knew well. "I'm fine. Just tired, I guess. Work's been a lot." I wanted to believe him, so I did, because it's easier to believe in tired than to imagine your world shifting underneath you. A few months later, I noticed something else. He started staying late more often. At first, it made sense. Projects, deadlines. But then, there were small inconsistencies. Receipts that didn't match his words. A shirt that smelled faintly of something floral. Not my perfume. His phone always faced down on the table. I remember asking once, trying to sound casual, "Who keeps calling you so late?" He laughed. "Just work. You know how my boss is." I nodded, smiled, and turned away before he could see the doubt in my eyes. Through all this, the kids noticed things too. Not the details, but the energy. Children always do. Emily, being older, became quieter. She'd watch us from the corner of her eye, reading the invisible language between her parents. Ryan, still innocent, would ask things like, "Why does Dad look sad?" And each time I'd find an excuse. "He's just tired." He's been working a lot, but inside a storm was forming. Quiet, slow, unstoppable. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done something different, listened harder, asked more. But love makes you blind in strange ways. You protect what you have by pretending not to see what's breaking it. I clung to the version of us that existed in memory. The young couple who dreamed of traveling, who built a life from scratch, who swore we'd always be honest. I held on even when honesty started to fade. I remember one particular evening vividly. It was winter, January. The snow outside turned the city into a quiet painting. The streets glowing under yellow streetlights. I had made soup. The kids were doing homework, and David was supposed to be home by 7. At 8:30, he still wasn't. When he finally walked in, his face flushed from the cold. I asked where he'd been. "Traffic," he said quickly. But his hair was damp, not from snow, from a shower. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and went back to stirring the pot. Later, when I lay beside him that night, I turned to look at his face in the dim light. He looked peaceful, asleep beside me, and yet, I felt lonelier than I ever had in my life. Chicago is a noisy city, horns, trains, sirens. But inside our apartment, it was the silence that hurt the most. Silence between two people who used to talk about everything. Sometimes I'd walk through Millennium Park on my lunch breaks, just to breathe. I'd watch people holding hands, laughing, moving through life together. And I'd think, when did we stop being that? I told myself all marriages go through phases. That after 17 years, maybe this was normal. Maybe love simply changes shape. I didn't realize how close we already were to breaking. Still, there were good days. We'd take the kids to Navy Pier, share popcorn at the movies, laugh over silly things. And for a moment, I'd believe we were okay again. I'd tell myself, see, he still loves you. But deep down, something in me already knew. There's a moment in every long marriage when you sense the shift, when you stop being two people walking side by side and become two people walking in parallel, close enough to see each other but not close enough to touch. That was us. And when I finally found that receipt, weeks later, I realized it hadn't been a sudden betrayal. It was the end result of 1,000 small distances we had ignored for too long. I wish I could say I found the truth suddenly, like tearing off a bandage. But it didn't happen that way. It was slow, like watching a shadow stretch across the floor and realizing, too late, that it's the night moving in. The months before I found that receipt were full of moments I can still see clearly now. Small things that didn't make sense, but that I brushed away because believing them felt too painful. There was one night when I called him around 8 o'clock. He didn't pick up. Not unusual, I told myself. He was probably driving, but when he got home later, his story didn't line up with the weather. He said there'd been rain, heavy traffic, except I had just been looking out our window all evening. There hadn't been a single drop. Still, I smiled. Still, I said, "That's rough," and served him dinner, because that's what I'd been doing for months, covering the cracks with politeness. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and find his side of the bed empty. He'd be out in the living room, sitting in the dark, scrolling on his phone. When I asked, he said, "Couldn't sleep." And I'd say, "Come back to bed." He'd come eventually, but his warmth next to me felt different. It wasn't comfort anymore. It was confusion. It was a stranger's body wearing my husband's familiar skin. The kids started noticing things too, though they didn't understand them. Emily became protective of me. Whenever David raised his voice, even slightly, she'd appear in the doorway, not saying anything, just watching. And when he left for work, she'd quietly ask, "Are you okay, Mom?" I'd smile and nod, pretending to sip my coffee. But she knew. Children always do. Ryan, on the other hand, still saw the world as simple. He'd draw pictures of our family, the four of us holding hands, and pin them on the fridge. Sometimes when I looked at those drawings, my heart would ache with guilt, because I didn't know how long I could keep that picture real. By spring, the distance between me and David had become something I could feel in the air. He spoke less, laughed less. Even his eyes stopped meeting mine. I'd catch him glancing at me sometimes, as if searching for something he couldn't find anymore. And I wondered if he was already mourning us. Not out of love, but out of habit. We had built a life so deeply intertwined that walking away would have felt like tearing off skin. Maybe that's why he didn't leave. Maybe that's why he hid instead. I remember one weekend when he suggested a short getaway. Just the two of us. "Maybe we need some time alone," he said. For a moment, I felt hopeful. I thought maybe this was his way of trying again. I booked a small place near Lake Geneva, somewhere quiet where we could breathe. But when we got there, the silence followed us. We went for walks, had dinners, even sat by the lake watching the sunset. But it all felt staged. He held my hand, but there was no spark. His touch felt like obligation. That night, as we lay in bed, I whispered, "Do you still love me?" He turned his head slowly and said, "Of course I do." But his eyes told a different story. I didn't push further, because deep down, I was afraid of the answer I already knew. After that trip, things got worse. He became defensive about everything. where he was going, what he was doing, even the smallest questions. Once I asked, "You've been using cash a lot lately. Everything okay?" He snapped. "Why are you checking on me all the time?" I froze, because I wasn't checking. Not really. I was just noticing. But in that moment, he made me feel like the problem. And that's another kind of betrayal, when someone twists your care into accusation. I began keeping my distance too, not as revenge, just self-preservation. We still shared a home, a life, routines. But I started sleeping closer to the edge of the bed, started spending more time in my office after dinner, stopped waiting for him to text when he was late. The silence became a wall between us, thick and tall. One evening I was helping Ryan with his school project when David came home. He kissed Ryan on the head, then looked at me. "I'm going to grab a shower," he said quickly, avoiding my eyes. Something in his tone felt rehearsed. When he left the room, Ryan looked up and asked innocently, "Mom, why does Dad always shower when he gets home now? He never used to." I froze. My throat went dry, and all I could say was, "Maybe he just likes to feel clean." But even my son could tell that wasn't the whole truth. At night, when everyone was asleep, I started to unravel quietly. I'd sit at the dining table staring at my laptop, unable to focus on work. I'd replay our life in my mind, searching for the moment he stopped choosing me. Was it after our second child was born? When my career took off? When he started feeling smaller next to me? I wanted answers, but the only person who could give them was the one who'd already betrayed me. One Saturday morning, I found a small pack of condoms in the glove compartment of his car, unopened, hidden beneath some old receipts. My heart stopped. My hands went cold. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He said, "I bought them just in case." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "Just in case what?" He said, "It's not what you think." That line again, the same useless line people use when the truth is exactly what you think. We argued for the first time in months. Really argued, not about the condoms, but about everything that had been festering beneath the surface. He accused me of being distant. I accused him of lying. He said, "You don't understand what it's like to feel unwanted." I said, "I've been begging for your attention for years." The kids were in their rooms, pretending not to hear, but I could see the shadows of their feet under the doors, and that broke me more than his words. That night, I slept in Emily's room. She didn't say anything, just moved over and let me lie beside her. We didn't talk, but she held my hand until I fell asleep. In that quiet darkness, I realized something. My daughter was comforting me for something she didn't even have the tools to understand, and I hated that. In the days that followed, David tried to act normal, cooking breakfast, asking about my day, offering small kindnesses, but everything felt hollow. Every gesture made me ache. At work, I found it hard to concentrate. I'd look at spreadsheets and see nothing but blurred numbers. Even my colleagues noticed. "You okay?" they'd ask. I'd smile and say, "Just tired." Tired. The word that covers every kind of heartbreak. Then came the day I finally found proof. That receipt from QQ Massage, the one that changed everything. It was in the pocket of his jeans, sitting on top of the laundry pile. If I hadn't reached into that pocket, maybe I'd still be living in denial. When I saw it, my first thought wasn't even anger. It was disbelief. How could someone I loved for 17 years go somewhere like that? I remember staring at the name of the place, at the time, at the total amount, $260, cash. The details felt almost comically small for the weight of what they meant. My whole marriage, balanced on a line of printed ink. I waited until the kids were asleep that night before I said anything. He came home later than usual, smelled faintly of mint and soap. I was sitting in the kitchen with the light off, the city glow from outside flickering across the tiles. He looked surprised when he saw me. "What are you doing up?" I held up the receipt. "This." His face went pale. He didn't even try to lie this time. Instead, he said quietly, "I made a mistake. A mistake. That word again, so small, so inadequate for the size of the wound." I didn't yell. I just asked questions. "How many times? When? Why?" He answered. Each answer hurt more than the last. And the part that burned deepest was knowing it had happened right after we'd been together, like our intimacy meant nothing. He tried to explain, said the woman was older, that it wasn't what I think, that it made him feel seen in a strange, shameful way, as if that made it less disgusting. I sat there in silence, trying to process that my husband, the father of my children, had been unfaithful in a way that felt both physical and emotional. And when I finally spoke, I said quietly, "You broke something you can't fix with words." He lowered his head, and for the first time in years, he cried. But his tears didn't comfort me. They only made me feel emptier. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of traffic, the faint breathing of my children down the hall. The world outside kept moving, but mine had stopped. It wasn't until dawn that I realized what hurt most wasn't just what he did. It was that he made me question everything we ever had. Every memory now felt stained. Every smile, every touch. I wondered if he'd been lying even then. And yet, beneath all the anger, there was still a strange kind of sorrow. Because even after what he'd done, part of me still loved him, and I hated myself for that. The morning after I found out, the house felt heavier. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was tension, a kind of stillness that hums under the skin. I went through the motions like always. Packed lunches, poured coffee, checked the weather. But my hands moved on their own. My mind was somewhere else. David came into the kitchen quietly. He looked exhausted, his eyes red, his shoulders slumped. He stood near the counter for a long time before saying, "We need to talk." I didn't look up. About what? You know what? I finally met his eyes, and for a moment I almost didn't recognize him. He looked small, not just guilty, defeated. I said, "You should have thought about talking before you did what you did." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "I know." He whispered, and that was it. No yelling, no drama. Just quiet, heavy truth sitting between us like a ghost. That day, I called in sick to work. Not because I wanted to rest, but because I couldn't face anyone. I sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, staring at nothing. I kept thinking about 17 years. Birthdays, anniversaries, the small rituals that made our life ours, and how easily he'd thrown them away for something that cost less than a dinner date. I felt disgusted, angry, but also numb, like the world had turned down its volume. Every sound, the ticking clock, the cars outside, even my own breathing, felt distant. Later that afternoon, Emily came home early. She must have sensed something was wrong because she didn't ask about homework or snacks. She just sat beside me and said, "Did Dad do something bad?" I turned to her slowly. "Why do you ask that?" "Because I heard you last night," she said, her voice trembling. "And because you've been crying all day." I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to your child that love can break? Not because of accidents or fate, but because one person chooses selfishness. I took her hand. "Sometimes," I said softly, "grown-ups hurt each other in ways that are hard to understand, but it's not your fault, and it's not your brother's fault either." She nodded, but I could see tears forming in her eyes. "Are you gonna leave him?" I couldn't answer because I didn't know. That night, I asked David to sleep in the guest room. He didn't resist. He just picked up his pillow, said, "Okay," and walked down the hall. I watched him go, feeling both relief and sadness. It's strange. How the same person who once made you feel safest can suddenly make your own home feel foreign. I spent that night staring at the ceiling again, listening to the faint creak of the floor whenever he moved in the other room. I wondered if he was crying too, and if he was, did that mean anything? Over the next few days, we lived like strangers sharing the same space. We spoke only when necessary. Breakfast, the kids, bills. He tried small gestures, making coffee, folding laundry, asking if I needed anything. But I couldn't meet his kindness, not yet. Every time he looked at me, I saw the image of that receipt, that place, that betrayal. It replayed in my mind like a loop that refused to end. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, he came into the living room and sat across from me. "I know I can't undo it," he said quietly, "but I need you to know I'm sorry." I didn't respond. He continued, "I don't even understand why I did it. It wasn't about you. It was about me feeling small, invisible. You've built this amazing life and I cut him off. "Stop. Don't make this about your insecurities. You had choices. You chose to lie. You chose to humiliate me." He nodded. "I know, and I hate myself for it." I looked at him for a long time. "You should," I said softly. He didn't defend himself. He just sat there, hands clasped, tears welling up. And for the first time, I saw something in him I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not fear, but shame. The kind that changes a person. The kids became quieter that week. Ryan kept asking, "Why is Dad sleeping in the other room?" I told him, "Dad and I just need a little space right now." He nodded slowly, as if trying to process what that meant. Emily stopped talking to her father altogether. If he asked her something, she'd answer with short, cold words. One night, I heard him crying in his room after she ignored him again. It was a different kind of pain. Watching him lose, not just me, but the connection with his children. After about 2 weeks, he asked if we could go to counseling. I was surprised. He said, "I know you probably hate me, but I can't live like this. I want to understand how I broke us." Part of me wanted to scream too late. Another part, the tired, quiet part, wanted peace. So I agreed. Our first session was awkward. We sat on opposite sides of a couch, the therapist in between us. A woman with kind eyes and a soft voice. She asked simple questions at first. How long we'd been married, how we met, what brought us there. Then she looked at David and asked, "Why did you do it?" He hesitated, then said, "I wanted to feel wanted. I thought it would make me feel better about myself. But it didn't. It made everything worse." Hearing him say that out loud made my stomach turn. I didn't cry. I just felt exhausted, like the weight of his words pressed against my chest. The therapist turned to me. "What do you need from him now?" I thought for a moment and said, "Honesty. Even if it hurts, I can handle pain. I can't handle lies." David nodded slowly. "I'll do anything," he said. And for the first time in weeks, I believed he meant it. Not because of his words, but because of the way his voice broke when he said them. Healing didn't happen overnight. In fact, it barely happened at all in the beginning. Every day felt like walking through shards of glass, each memory cutting a little deeper. But therapy gave us something small, structure, a place to put the chaos. We started having short, honest conversations again. About the kids, about work, about our fears. Sometimes they ended in tears, sometimes in silence, but at least we were talking. One night, I found Ryan sitting on the couch watching TV alone. He looked up and said, "Mom, are you and Dad friends again?" I smiled faintly. "Not yet, sweetheart. But we're trying," he nodded thoughtfully. "I think you should. Because when you and Dad don't talk, the house feels sad." His words hit me harder than I expected, because he was right. Our silence had filled the whole house, coloring everything. After he went to bed, I sat alone in the dark, thinking about what he said, trying. That's what we were doing. And maybe that was something. By the third therapy session, David opened up more. He talked about his insecurities, how he felt overshadowed by my career, how he'd stopped feeling needed, how he thought I looked at him differently. None of it excused what he did, but it explained the cracks that led there. The therapist turned to both of us and said, "Betrayal doesn't end a marriage. Silence does. You both stopped seeing each other long before this happened." Those words stayed with me, because she was right. We had both built walls. Mine out of disappointment, his out of shame, until neither of us could reach the other. Still, there were moments I couldn't forgive him. Like when I'd pass by that massage place on my way to work. I saw it once, by accident. A small neon sign, tucked between a dry cleaner and a nail salon. It made me sick to my stomach, because that's where he chose to throw us away. I went home that day, and cried in the shower until the water ran cold. That night, he found me sitting on the floor, still wrapped in a towel. He didn't speak. He just sat beside me, fully dressed, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." I didn't push him away, but I didn't hold him either. We just sat there, two broken people trying to remember how to breathe, in the same space again. Emily took longer to soften. She refused to go to family therapy at first, said she didn't want to talk to someone who destroyed our family. One evening, she and David had their first real confrontation. I stayed in the kitchen listening from the doorway. She said, "You were supposed to love Mom. You were supposed to protect her." And he said, voice trembling, "You're right. I failed, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better for her, and for you." After that, she didn't reply. But later that night, I saw her leave a small note outside his door. It said, "I'm still mad, but I don't hate you." Sometimes healing begins in the smallest gestures. As weeks turned into months, the sharpness of the pain began to dull. It didn't disappear. It just changed shape. It became a scar I carried quietly, one that reminded me not only of what I'd lost, but also what I was learning about myself. I realized that forgiveness isn't about excusing someone's actions. It's about releasing yourself from the weight of hate. And slowly, I began to let go, not of the memory, but of the need to keep bleeding from it. One night, as the city lights shimmered beyond our window, David sat beside me and said, "I know we'll never be the same, but if you let me, I'll spend every day proving that I can be better." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not promising anything," I said quietly, "but I'm willing to see what trying looks like." And for the first time in months, he smiled. A small, hopeful smile that didn't erase the pain, but softened it. Healing doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't arrive one morning wrapped in sunshine and forgiveness. It comes quietly, in small choices, in ordinary days that no longer hurt as much. In the months that followed, that's how it was for us. Slow, uneven, fragile, but real. The first big change was honesty. We promised to stop pretending. If something hurt, we'd say it. If one of us felt distant, we'd name it before it grew into silence. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, when I'd wake up and feel the anger return, like a wave I thought I'd already survived. But each time, David stayed steady. He didn't make excuses anymore. He didn't defend his choices. He simply listened, really listened, and took responsibility for the man he'd been that, more than anything, helped me believe change was possible. Counseling became part of our rhythm. Every Thursday at 6 p.m., we'd drive downtown, past the city lights of Chicago, to the same small office with the soft yellow lamp in the corner. Sometimes we'd arrive in silence. Other times we'd talk about the kids or work, gentle, neutral things that reminded us we still shared a life. Our therapist often told us, marriage after betrayal isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about building something new with what's left. And I started to see that was true. We couldn't go back to the marriage we had before. It didn't exist anymore. But we could build something different. Maybe even stronger if both of us were willing to keep showing up. At home, the kids began to relax again. The air felt lighter. We started eating dinners together. Awkward at first, but gradually warmer. One night, Emily made pasta and called everyone to the table. She looked at both of us and said, "Can we please just have one night where we don't talk about feelings?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. David smiled too. So we ate, and we talked about school, about Chicago weather, about a stray cat that had started visiting our backyard. For an hour, we were just a family again. Not perfect, not healed, but together. One Saturday, David asked if he could take me out for dinner. No pressure, just a quiet evening. Part of me hesitated, but I agreed. He chose a small restaurant by the lake. Not fancy, just cozy, with soft lighting and the faint sound of jazz playing in the background. As we sat across from each other, he said, "This feels like a first date again." I smiled slightly. "Except this time we know all the mistakes." He nodded. "Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe now we can stop pretending we're perfect." It was strange how natural it felt to talk to him again, like rediscovering an old friend after years of silence. After dinner, we walked by the lakefront. The air was cool, the city skyline glowing in the distance. He reached for my hand hesitantly, as if waiting for permission. I didn't pull away. We walked like that for a while. Not talking, not explaining. Just two people moving forward, step by step, into the night. At home, I began to rediscover myself too. For years, I had defined my worth by what I gave. To my family, to my career, to my marriage. Now, I started asking what I needed for me. I joined a yoga class. I started journaling again. Not about pain, but about gratitude. And little by little, I began to see that even though my heart had been broken, it was still mine, still capable of love, of softness, of hope. One afternoon, I found David fixing the old record player we'd bought early in our marriage. It had been broken for years. He looked up and smiled shyly. Thought maybe we could bring back some music. He put on one of our old records, a soft piano track we used to dance to when the kids were little. The sound was scratchy, imperfect, but beautiful in its own way. I stood in the doorway, listening, and without meaning to, I started crying. He walked over slowly and held out his hand. "Dance with me." I hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded. We swayed in the living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of our history. It wasn't a romantic movie kind of moment. It was tender, tired, and deeply human. And it was enough. Emily began to notice the change, too. One evening, she hugged me in the kitchen and whispered, "You seem happier, Mom." I kissed her forehead. "I'm learning how to be," I said. Then she added, "Dad's trying really hard. I think he's scared of losing us again." I smiled softly. "He should be, but I think he's learning too." Her words stayed with me, because she was right. David wasn't just apologizing anymore. He was rebuilding, through actions, not promises. Sometimes I still caught him looking at me. Not the way he used to, but with a quiet kind of respect, as if he finally saw me for who I'd been all along. He once told me, "You're stronger than I ever realized." And I said, I had to be. That was our truth, not wrapped in romance, but in reality. We celebrated our 18th anniversary quietly. No big dinner, no gifts. Just us, at home, with the kids. Ryan made a card with a drawing of the four of us holding hands under a big red heart. On it, he'd written, "Family forever." It made me cry, not because everything was perfect, but because we were still here, still trying. That night, after the kids went to bed, I and David sat outside on the balcony. The city lights flickered below, the hum of traffic soft and steady. he said. "Do you think we'll ever be what we were?" I took a long breath before answering. "No," I said. "But maybe we'll become something better. Something real." He nodded. "I can live with that." We sat there in silence, letting the cool night air wrap around us. Two people who had walked through fire and were still standing. Therapy eventually shifted from couples to family. The four of us would sit in that small office, talking about what we learned. Ryan said, "I learned that even grown-ups make big mistakes." Emily added, "And that sometimes love isn't perfect, but it's still love." Our therapist smiled and said, "That's a very wise thing to say." And I realized something in that moment. Maybe the hardest part of surviving betrayal isn't the pain itself, but learning to let love exist beside it. A few weeks later, I finally visited that massage parlor street again. I had avoided it for months, always taking the long way around. But that day, I decided to face it. I drove past slowly, saw the flickering sign, QQ Massage, still there, unchanged. It didn't hurt like before. It just felt distant, like a chapter from another life. When I got home, I told David I'd done it. He looked surprised. "How did it feel?" "Like closing a door," I said quietly. He nodded, his eyes soft. "I'm glad, and I was too, because that was the day I realized I'd stopped being a victim of what he did. I had become the author of what came next. Life found its rhythm again. Not perfect, but peaceful. We laughed more. The kids stopped tensing when we entered the same room. The air in the house changed, lighter, forgiving. Sometimes I'd still wake up at night and remember the pain, but instead of drowning in it, I'd breathe and remind myself, we made it through. Looking back now, I don't see the affair as the end of my marriage. I see it as the moment we were forced to start over, with honesty, with humility, with choice. I wish it hadn't happened, but I also know it made me see who we really are beneath the illusion of perfect. I learned that love isn't a feeling you fall into once. It's a decision you make every single day, especially when it's hard. Sometimes when the kids are asleep and the house is quiet, I think about the woman I was before all this, the one who believed betrayal was unforgivable, the one who thought strength meant never bending. Now I know strength also means allowing yourself to heal, to soften without breaking, to forgive without forgetting. David and I still go for walks by the lake sometimes. The city lights shimmer, and the air carries the smell of rain. We don't talk about the past much anymore. We talk about plans, Emily's college, Ryan's baseball games, the trips we might take one day. And sometimes we just walk in silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because there's peace in the quiet. I'm not naive. I know life isn't a straight line, and hearts don't heal perfectly. But I also know we've come farther than I ever thought possible. And that, to me, is its own kind of miracle. It's strange how life moves on, even when you think it can't. At first, every morning felt like waking up inside the same storm. But slowly the clouds began to lift, and one day, I realized I could see the sky again. Now, when I look at David across the table, I don't see the man who betrayed me anymore. I see the man who stayed, who faced his shame, who rebuilt what he broke, one day at a time. We're not the same couple we once were. Maybe we never will be, but I think that's okay, because what we have now is real, raw, honest, and built on something deeper than comfort. It's built on choice. Sometimes people ask me if I truly forgave him. The truth is, forgiveness didn't come all at once. It wasn't a single decision. It was a process, like peeling away layers of pain, until only peace remained. I didn't forgive him for his sake. I did it for mine, because carrying anger felt like carrying fire in my hands. It only burned me. And I didn't forget. I just stopped letting the memory control me. That, I think, is the real meaning of healing. Not pretending nothing happened, but learning to live fully, even though it did. I still remember the night I finally let myself smile again. It wasn't anything grand. Just a quiet evening, the kids watching a movie, the smell of popcorn in the air. David looked over and said, "You're smiling." And I said, "I know." It felt good, not because everything was perfect, but because it was peaceful. Because I had survived something I once thought would break me. To anyone listening right now, if you've ever been through betrayal or heartbreak, I want you to know something. You are not weak for feeling pain. You are not foolish for having trusted. And you are not broken beyond repair. You are human. And healing takes time, grace, and a kind of courage most people never talk about. There will be days when you want to scream and nights when you think you'll never trust again. But one day, you'll wake up, and the pain won't feel so sharp. You'll find joy again in small, ordinary things. Your child's laughter, the morning light, a quiet cup of coffee. That's how healing begins. Not with grand gestures, but with simple moments that remind you life still has beauty left in it. If you asked me now what I learned through all of this, I'd say I learned that love is not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about being willing to look at someone, even after they've hurt you, and say, "I still see the good in you," even if it takes time to find it again. And maybe even more importantly, it's about being able to look at yourself and say, "I still deserve love. I still deserve peace." Because no matter how deep the hurt goes, your worth doesn't disappear with someone else's mistake. Sometimes I wonder if we had to break in order to truly see each other. Maybe we did. Maybe the cracks let the light in. Now when I walk by the lake at night, I can see our reflections in the water. Not perfect, but whole. Two people who made it through the fire, not untouched, but transformed. And that, I think, is what love really is. Not a fairy tale, but a choice to keep showing up even after the story takes a dark turn. To you listening right now, I want to ask, what do you think forgiveness really means? Would you have stayed or walked away? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because these stories, they only matter when they start a conversation, when they remind us that we're not alone in our pain, and not alone in our healing either. So please, share what you think in the comments. Your story might be the one that helps someone else heal tonight. And if this story touched you, if it made you reflect or even just feel a little less alone, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find these stories. Real stories, told from the heart, about love, loss, and everything in between. Because somewhere out there, someone might be sitting in their car or lying awake in the dark, feeling exactly how I once felt. And maybe hearing this will remind them that healing is possible. Thank you for listening. Thank you for spending this time with me, for letting me share my heart, and for allowing my pain to become something meaningful. Remember, life doesn't end when trust is broken. Sometimes it begins there, when we learn who we are, what we can survive, and how much love we're still capable of giving. I hope wherever you are right now, you find peace too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday soon, when you least expect it, in the quiet of an ordinary moment, you'll realize you made it through. And that, my friend, is the beginning of your new chapter.